Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a Kelly Files special, Defying the Sword. I'm Megan Kelly. On a warm Sunday evening, May 3rd of this year, two would-be jihadis armed with assault-style weapons and dressed in bulletproof vests drove more than 1,000 miles from Phoenix to Texas to attack an event they saw as an insult to the Muslim faith. 30-year-old Elton Simpson and his roommate, 34-year-old Nadir Sufi, were reportedly sympathetic to the Islamic terror group, and Simpson had been on the FBI's radar for some years. The two were killed in the attempted attack, but they did succeed in touching off a new and heated debate about radical Islam and how best to confront it. The pair had targeted a cartoon contest that featured caricatures of Muhammad, considered a prophet by Muslims. Followers of Islam deemed that any physical depiction of him, even a positive one, is blasphemous. Immediately after the incident, a number of people started criticizing the event organizers, Pam Geller included, for, quote, going too far and, quote, deliberately provoking, even inviting the attack. We'll get to that issue just a little later in the show. But first comes the question of how best to deal with a dangerous faction within Islam, which is attracting new converts like Simpson and Sufi every day. In recent months, we have spoken with several Muslims and former Muslims who have become leading voices for reforming their faith. They have risked much to take this stand, to defy the sword of the radicals, and have suffered anger, scorn, even death threats as a result. Tonight, you will meet them, hear what they think about the problem, and learn why they do what they do, knowing it could cost them everything. Trace Gallagher starts us off tonight with the story of a woman by the name of Hirsi Ali.
From her biggest advocates, Hirsi Ali receives the highest praise. From her strongest detractors, she receives death threats. And day to day, she has no idea which side she'll come in contact with. And yet she continues to fight for women and against Islam, because she says it's where her journey has brought her.
I remember distinctly as a teenager when we just used to be regular Muslims, and when things started to change and members of our own community started to preach. They called it da'wah. And what they were preaching was hostile to women.
Hirsi Ali was born in Mogadishu, Somalia, the daughter of a Somali politician, an outspoken man whose political opinions at times cost him his freedom. The family left Somalia for Saudi Arabia, then Ethiopia, before finally settling in Kenya. Throughout her school years, she received a strict Muslim education. But in 1992, to escape what she says was an arranged marriage to a distant cousin, Hirsi Ali fled to the Netherlands and was given political asylum. After graduating with a master's in political science, Hirsi Ali became a critic of Islam and the Dutch government. But it wasn't until 9/11, after listening to Osama bin Laden cite the Quran to justify the attacks, did Hirsi Ali become completely disenchanted with Islam, saying it must be defeated and crushed. In 2003, she ran for and won a seat in the Dutch parliament, championing immigration reform, while still fighting for the rights of Muslim women and against the abuse of young Muslim girls for being subjected to female genital mutilation, something her father also opposed. But because he was in prison, Hirsi Ali's maternal grandmother had the procedure performed on her at the age of 5.
Female genital mutilation is practiced for the same reason that girls are locked up, the same reason that there are child brides, the same reason that we are supposed to cover ourselves from head to toe. It's this obsession with controlling our sexuality.
Oh Allah.
In 2004, she worked with filmmaker Theo van Gogh to create Submission, depicting Islam as a religion that abuses women. Several weeks after the film aired on Dutch television, Van Gogh was murdered, with a letter pinned to his body calling for the death of Hirsi Ali. She was asked on the Kelly File about any regrets in making the film.
Do you wish you hadn't made the movie?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I feel the only way to really fight, the only way we have a chance of fighting these barbarians is by talking about it, by expressing ourselves.
And it's worth it to you, despite the danger that has obviously been posed to your own life.
It is worth to me because I love life more than I love death. They love death. that message is so much stronger than anything they put out there.
In 2005, Time magazine named Hirsi Ali one of the world's 100 most influential people. In 2006, Reader's Digest named her European of the Year. She is now a fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. She has also written several books, has regular and often controversial speaking engagements, and founded an organization for women's rights. Hirsi Ali now claims to have a better understanding of radical Islam.
You actually do understand this ideology.
I understand it, and they make it very clear what it is that motivates them.
Joining me now, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the founder of the Ayaan Hirsi Ali Foundation and author of the new book, Heretic: Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. Ayaan, great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me on again.
This is a very bold, brave book, and you go right to the heart of it, talking about how the problem, in your view, is within the Islamic faith itself. You're calling for a reformation that is a 5-point plan, and at the heart of the plan, one of the things that you push is that the Islamic faith needs to get rid of Sharia law. In response, the critics say that guts the entire faith altogether. You're asking Muslims to turn into atheists. Is that a fair charge?
I think it's an unfair charge, because in considering these 5 amendments that I'm proposing, I asked myself the question that some of my Muslim students asked me when they challenged me and said, if you take this out, what's going to be left of Islam? Well, praying 5 times a day is going to be left. Fasting in the month of Ramadan, taking care of the poor. If you want to go to Mecca, you can do all of that, and you can confess to believing in one God and Muhammad being his prophet. And if you do those things, you can still be a Muslim, along with all the other traditions and rituals of, where you can enjoy religion as a function of community and as a source of spirituality without hurting other people.
But you want to get rid of, you want to change people's attitudes towards the Quran. You want people to believe and focus more on life after death as opposed to death after life.
Well, I'll rephrase it. I want people to emphasize life before death as opposed to life after death. This life after death thing, we've created a narrative of death. You have mothers ululating when their sons kill people and in the process die. They celebrate them because there's this belief that was developed over years that if you die, you're going to be rewarded in heaven, and that reward is clearly spelled out. And we need to get rid of that. We need for Muslims to say, especially American Muslims, Western Muslims, to distance themselves from that narrative of death.
Let's talk about you and your story, because Trace walked us through it and what happened to you. I mean, from the mutilation all the way through to the murder of Theo Van Gogh with a knife in his chest, calling for your murder. And to this day, your life is threatened and in jeopardy because you have spoken out. How do you do it, Ayaan? I mean, under such threat 24/7.
Yeah.
And when we see that it's not like these terrorists are standing down. I mean, we see these murders just in Texas, the attempted murder for just drawing Muhammad, never mind saying what you say. How do you do it?
It's exhausting, but it's worth it. And I honestly don't see any other way of, again, exposing this agenda of these Islamists. They have this ideology. They're targeting Muslim individuals. I was a Muslim individual within a Muslim family in a Muslim neighborhood. They penetrated our neighborhood and our schools, and they convinced me as a teenager that this was a better narrative for humanity.
Right, there was a time that you believed as they believe.
Exactly. And I was convinced, and I didn't have my faculties of critical thinking developed. And over time, I'm now 45 years old, over time, of course, I've come to understand that if back then we had, as children, as teenagers, as young adults, if we had our faculties of critical thinking developed, we would have completely told them, oh, no, I'm not going to offer my life for what you believe in. Why should I?
How did you get pulled out of it?
And in many ways, of course, I was fortunate, but I have had the fortune to be educated. I left the path that my father chose for me. I didn't go to Canada to live with the husband that he picked for me. I instead asked for asylum in the Netherlands. And there, I started to ask questions. And I'm very fortunate and very happy, and I thank my professors at Leiden University for teaching me how to think, not what to think. And by the time 9/11 came around and I was 31 years old, I thought, goodness, do I agree with what these young men did? No, I did not. But then that means I'm distancing myself from the Quran and from the Prophet Muhammad. But if I do that, I'll go along with my conscience. And so I had this conflict between my own conscience and what I was being told, by my God in the Quran and by my prophets. And I decided to go along with my conscience.
We're going to have much more with Ayaan Hirsi Ali in a moment. Stand by, because still ahead we will speak with a Muslim woman who once sat and watched decapitation videos to better understand these terrorists. We'll get her take on how political correctness and the media may both be helping the spread of radical Islam. And up next, you will meet the man who calls himself an American Muslim patriot and learn why he is worried that the extremists may be winning their fight against free speech and other American values.
The Muslim community right now is being told by the President of the United States that our leaders are people that don't care about this cancer, that not only is radicalizing Muslims in America and Canada and Paris and elsewhere, but is destroying our communities that have an opportunity for reform in Egypt and Syria and elsewhere.
Welcome back to our Kelly Files special, Defying the Sword. Tonight we're speaking with several Muslims and former Muslims who have taken a risky public stand to point to the threat from radical Islam, including our next guest, Dr. Zudi Jasser. Zudi's story starts when his parents, who left Syria in the 1960s, fleeing a repressive regime for the freedom of America. Zudi was born in Wisconsin, a devout Muslim brought up in a mosque built by his own family.
That small-town mosque, immersed in the glow of a newfound freedom, taught me the clarity of love of country, love of liberty, and love of faith.
He attended the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and there he first experienced a very different kind of Islam than the one he was taught by his parents. Zudi says very early on he recognized that political Islam was eating away at his religion. Zudi ended up joining the U.S. Navy, earning his medical degree on a military scholarship, serving 11 years, and leaving service as a lieutenant commander. In 1999, Zudi moved to Arizona to take over his father's medical practice. And then 9/11 happened. The murder of thousands at the hands of radical Islamic terrorists compelled Dr. Jasser to act. He helped found, and today he is the president of, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, or AIFD, an organization dedicated to fighting the dangerous ideology now known as radical Islam. The AIFD has become one of the most prominent American Muslim groups in the United States, and it has made Dr. Jasser a target for critics.
From Dr. Jasser to come here and act like Muslims are the problem, I think is erroneous. I think people who want to engage in nothing less than Muslim really love you a lot.
Despite the backlash, Dr. Jasser has continued sharing his warnings from college lecture halls to the floor of the U.S. Congress.
The threat, if anything, is growing with the growth of Islamist radicalism in the Middle East, and we see Islamist parties coming to power.
Joining me now, Dr. Zudi Jasser, author of The Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. Doc, good to see you. Thank you very much for being here tonight. And so, Ayaan Hirsi Ali has a message about Islam itself. Is your message about Islam itself, or is it about radical Islam?
My message is about the need for reform, about liberty, and about the enemy and getting it right, which is political Islam. So what is political Islam? It's the belief in theocracy, the belief of the identity of the Islamic State. So this problem is huge. I mean, the magnitude, we're talking about movements that include hundreds of millions out of the 1.6 billion Muslims. And as I realized at the University of Wisconsin, my faith is not just a personal journey with God, but it has been inextricably intertwined with the identity of the Islamic State. And if there's anything I learned, and I learned from my parents who were American patriots, is that what America got right was its battle against theocracy, and we Muslims need to go through that same battle.
But so just to take a step back, because Ayaan left the Muslim faith. I mean, she is no longer a believer, and she's been through so much. One can hardly blame her. However, you grew up in a different kind of Islam. You were taught different things. And so, for those who are out there believing that all of Islam is radical and would create jihadis, is that true? Do you believe that?
Absolutely not. I mean, the Islam that I learned and learned from my parents, my grandfather, one was a newspaper writer who served country in Syria and was put in jail for those beliefs. My other grandfather was a Sharia court judge, but we were learned values that we were individuals. We could decide what was Islam and what wasn't. So certainly there are forms of Islam out there that are theocratic, that are dominating 56 Muslim majority countries. But the Islam I learned was a personal faith with no central authority, with a personal relationship with God.
So it's the rise of political Islam that we're seeing more and more of. Are we seeing that here? I mean, obviously we have some cases, but are we seeing that here domestically, inside the United States?
Oh, absolutely. The people that claim to speak for our faith were fertilized and grown and sprouted by the Saudis, by the Qataris and others. So most of the movements that are organized that use Islam as an identity in America started in the 60s with the Muslim Student Association that are what I call Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups.
And so, I mean, Ayan's got a 5-point plan, she says, to reform Islam, and she's been attacked by those, you know, as I mentioned to her, for they say what she's pushing is atheism, if you get rid of the 5 things she wants to get rid of. What do you say is the answer?
I think the answer is for us to come to terms with the fact that much of what is considered to be Islamic law kills apostates, is based in blasphemy laws, second, third, fourth-class citizenship of women where they don't get rights at equality. Yes, there are even passages in the Quran where women get half a vote of a man, a quarter of the inheritance. All these things need to be looked at by scholars that are modern, that are American first, believe in liberty first, and can reform these things. The first step is to defeat the Islamic State concept. Then in the next generation will come new schools of thought of Sharia that build first on that foundation of liberty and our First Amendment. And that movement can happen if Americans get behind the need to take sides within the House of Islam and not become anti-Islam.
Oh, Zudi, always interesting hearing you. Thank you so much. We'll get back to you in a moment as well. Meantime, while we are tonight hearing former and current Muslims who are warning about the threat from radical Islam, there are some in the faith who think our guests are the real threat. One of those folks will join us for a must-see debate just ahead. And up next, a Muslim doctor who says her experience treating the survivors of 9/11 changed her political worldview forever. Right after this break, Qanta Ahmed on why America may be falling behind in the fight against the radicals. Almost every time we do a segment on this subject, we get all sorts of complaints from CARE. That's the number one, that we're Islamophobic, and on it goes.
Excellent observation, because Islamophobia is a means to silence it. It's an absolutely, I'd say, malignant strategy, and very few people are brave enough to confront this.
Welcome back. Our Kelly File special continues now with the story of Dr. Qanta Ahmed. Like Ayan Hirsi Ali and Dr. Jasser, she too thinks there is a dramatic threat from radical Islam, and once actually sat with a terror expert to review jihadists' videos of decapitations, what she called a pivotal experience. But unlike our other guests, she has a different approach for addressing this issue. We'll speak with her in a moment, but first, more on her story. Dr. Qanta Ahmed was born in London, raised in the Islamic faith.
I'm a granddaughter of Muslims born in India.
She earned her medical degree at the University of Nottingham. She took a job practicing and teaching medicine in a country she thought she understood, Saudi Arabia. It was while Qanta was there that the attacks of September 11th happened. She was stunned by the reaction of some colleagues and fellow Muslims who did not share her feelings of horror at the loss of innocent life. In 2010, Dr. Ahmed moved to New York City to continue her medical career. And then another turning point. For the first time, she saw recruitment videos of child jihadists ritualistically killing adults in the name of Islam. Qanta traveled to her parents' homeland, Pakistan, visiting a school that rehabilitated children who were brainwashed by Islamists. In 2012, she testified before the House Homeland Security Committee on radical Islam in the United States.
Islamism is a political ideology with totalitarian missions.
Dr. Qanta Ahmed joins me now. She is author of In the Land of Invisible Women. What a great title, Doctor. Good to see you tonight. In the Land of Invisible Women is right, because that is one issue we have yet to fully explore. And that is something that drove Ayan to have the views that she has. And that is something you share with her, the treatment of women and how abhorrent it is in some factions of Islam.
Yes, Megan, and thanks for tracking me down here in Jerusalem, where actually I'm participating in talks to combat anti-Semitism, which is a central belief in political Islamism. I have all the privileges that you just mentioned: international travel, education, freedom of movement, ability to hold wealth, because of the Islam my parents gave me. And yet all of those privileges are contracted under Islamism. Much of what Ayan speaks about is absolutely rings true when it comes to political Islamism. And she's careful to point out this is not the sum of Islam. Gender apartheid is one manifestation of that. Virulent Islamist anti-Semitism is another, very threatening. And making anything other, including myself or other members who are participating in this important piece, because we are non-Islamists, we are also deemed infidel. This is absolutely anathema to what I understand to be Islam.
Even in doing this special, there will be people who come out and say the whole thing, even discussing this, is somehow Islamophobic. It's like you cannot discuss the Islamicist faction of Islam without being accused of Islamophobia.
You're absolutely right, Megan, and you've led the discussion on the Kelly file. We've talked together about Honor Diaries, the documentary that I participated with Ayan, and I have been accused, not just in media, but also in person at Rutgers University, of being an Islamophobe for raising this. This is a bold attempt by Islamists to shut down critical scrutiny of them. Islam is robust. It's a faith that's persisted for 14 centuries. It can withstand criticism. It can withstand all kinds of slander. It can withstand cartoons being drawn about it. But Islamism is fragile. You scrutinize it and it crumbles. So Islamism is a useful word, and yes, I combat it. And it does inspire decapitations that were so rare, I needed to see them with a terror expert 5 years ago. Now they're everyday commonplace on Twitter if you want to look at what Islamic State is doing.
At what point does being a Muslim, being a follower of Islam, convert, over into Islamicism?
So great question, and in fact Ayan explained it very clearly. The inability to think critically, and a basic tool is to be able to decide what is moral and what is consistent with the large overarching ideals of Islam. So you take out critical thinking, you take out faith literacy, and you can indoctrinate armies of children and youth that this is Islam, when actually it's bold political totalitarian ideology with very violent intent. You teach armies of children you'll benefit if you commit homicide and also lose your life in the process. They have no ability to distinguish that. They will do it readily.
It's basically what is written is written. What the radicals believe, they believe. But the difference is modernity, reason, and critical thinking. And we're going to pick up on that point still ahead, because as I stand you by, Doctor, thank you, we've got Ayan Hirsi Ali, who's coming back, along with a man who just called Ayan's book on Islam, quote, the worst thing ever written. He sees things very differently, and they will debate. Up next. Plus, what about the terror attack down in Texas and suggestions that the organizers invited their own attempted murder with a contest to draw Muhammad? Our panel, they're all back, and they will weigh in on that just ahead.
Idea that there's a violent war, there is a violent assault on freedom of speech, clearly was brought home last night.
And welcome back now to our Kelly File special, Defying the Sword. Tonight we are looking at the issue of radical Islam and how best to deal with it. In her book, Heretic, Ayan Hirsi Ali argues that Islam needs a reformation, even a so-called gut renovation. But not everyone agrees. Harun Mogul is a senior correspondent for Religion Dispatches, a fellow at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. And also back with us now is Ayan Hirsi Ali. Harun, let me start with you. What is it that about Ayan's call for a reformation with which you disagree?
Well, two things. The first is that she has no traction in the Muslim community. So if we're really interested in tackling radical Islam, and we should be, she doesn't have an audience. She doesn't have traction. So if you're talking about a reform that's trying to stop a real problem in the present day, then it should be a reform that people are willing to listen to. Secondly, and more seriously, her whole idea is backwards. She says Islam needs a reformation to stop extremism. But Islam already had a reformation, and it's the reason we have extremism. So her solution to the problem is actually the cause of the problem. So if we want to keep America safe and be safe for ourselves, we would do better to look elsewhere.
What is your solution to this problem?
Well, there's no single solution. These are different societies in different places. One of the solutions is to create democratic societies, to allow room for debate, to have a better foreign policy, to have a better conversation. One of the solutions is to work incrementally towards change and not expect things to flip overnight.
The problem is people like Ayan have come out and spoken out about their experiences in the Islamic faith, and in particular the treatment of women. And then what we see is a backlash against them, calling them Islamophobic, and even death threats. I mean, it's sort of some groups within the Islamic faith prove her very point by threatening her life for speaking out about Islam.
Absolutely true, and it's unacceptable. Violence against anyone is unacceptable.
So how do we get past, I mean, is there anything we can be saying or even discussing here in the United States that can get us past that, or that can stop this problem, at least within our borders?
Well, there is no problem within our borders significantly.
There isn't?
Let's look at what happened in Dallas, Texas, for example, right? 2 men who are already known to the FBI, who are already radicalized, attacked an event. No American Muslim organization issued any meaningful statement of protest against the event. These 2 men did not even bring up radical ideas in their mosque. Why? Because they knew the minute they would bring them up, they would be reported.
ISIS has a presence in all 50 states. We have a little bit of an issue.
With respect, the FBI also says the #1 terror threat in America is domestic right-wing groups. So if you're going to quote the FBI, then let's quote all of the FBI.
Okay, so no, but that's okay. So in your view, the right-wing groups are more of a threat to America than radical Islam.
I'm saying what the FBI is saying. You quoted the FBI, so I'm just going with that.
Okay, so that's what you think we should focus on.
No, I think we should focus on both. But at the same time,
okay, so that's what I'm asking you. How here in the United States do we focus on the problem of radical Islam?
Well, part of the problem is we make these sweeping generalizations about Islam that make us less safe. Look, law enforcement has limited resources.
How do they make us less safe?
Because we can't. I'll finish the thought. We can't look at everyone. And if we have this idea that every single Muslim is suspect, that everyone is secretly an Islamist or a jihadist, then we are basically diluting our resources.
Who says that every Muslim is a suspect?
Ayan Hirsi Ali does. She regularly conflates Muslims with extremists. She called for war on Islam. She called in a Reason magazine interview in 2007 for a war with Islam. She said there is no such thing as a moderate Muslim. She said that radicalism, she said it on this show just now, radicalism is embedded in Islam.
Let me let her respond. She's sitting right here. Go ahead, Ayan.
Sure. I don't. I have in my latest book, and I invited this gentleman to read it, I distinguish between 3 sets of Muslims. There are the Medina Muslims with a narrative. They are about jihad, about Sharia law. They invest in life after death instead of life before death. And they are targeting Muslim families, Muslim individuals, and Muslim communities here and elsewhere. I also say the vast majority of Muslims are peace-loving. I put them under the umbrella of Mecca Muslims, and their children, they are being targeted in many ways by these radicals. And then there is this group of reforming Muslims. You've just mentioned Zudi Jasser, Qanta Ahmed, and many more. I think what this gentleman is doing is he's obfuscating. He is trying to distract us from, and he himself may in fact be part of this Medina Muslim group, because there are different ways that the Medina Muslims try to silence this discussion on what is going on, the radical Islam, political Islam. If you want to distract attention from that, you focus on those people like me who are born within Islam, who are saying, hey, look, there are people, individuals among us who are trying...
Right, and you attack the messenger.
And they attack the messenger.
We've seen that done repeatedly. Haroon, is that
doing exactly what...
She just accused me of being a Medina Muslim. I mean, this is exactly what I'm saying. This is not a serious conversation. If we want to talk about facts, the overwhelming majority of American Muslims, including conservative American Muslims, are happily integrated. Yes, I said it at the beginning. There is a threat. There is a radical threat. I'm not denying it. And I think it would be extremely grossly irresponsible to deny it. I'm simply asking if it's as great a threat as we think it is.
What do you think is the solution to to solving the problem of radical Islam within the United States, which now you've acknowledged.
There isn't a problem
you
with
just
radical
acknowledged
Islam
that there
in the United
was.
States.
You just acknowledged that there was. If we don't have a problem with radical Islam, why do we have ISIS in all 50 states?
I didn't finish what I said. First of all, we don't have ISIS in 50 states.
Well,
Secondly,
you said
the
the
group
FBI,
in Texas,
and the FBI says we do.
Okay. The group in Texas was not actually connected to ISIS. They were inspired by them.
You're the one who put all the credence in the FBI, and now I'm telling you the FBI says ISIS is in every state, and now you're telling me we can't listen to the FBI.
Sure. Thirdly, all I'm saying is that there is not ISIS in 50 states.
So now on this point you know better than the FBI, but when it's right-wing extremists, you don't.
He said right-wing extremism was more powerful than more threatening to us.
So here's the problem, Haroon. If you're acknowledging that radical Islam is a problem in the United States, which you did initially, and now you're saying it's not, when you say you don't acknowledge it, it diminishes your own credibility.
No,
it makes the audience think you're not the one who's serious. The point about peace-loving Muslims in America is well taken. I'm trying to get you to offer a useful solution on the non-peace-loving Muslims who are in the United States.
I'd be happy to elaborate on the kind of work we're doing. Every Muslim community I've ever worked with in the United States has talked about working with law enforcement and better ways to work with law enforcement. We're doing it right now. When I'm saying radical Islam is not the threat we're making it out to be, I'm not denying there's a threat. I'm denying the scale of the threat. And I'm also pointing the viewer's attention to the fact that we are working on this. We are American. Of course we're concerned about this. I deal on a regular basis with Muslim communities where we have parents who have to worry about every single thing a normal parent does and then have to wonder if their children are going to be lured into this kind of idiotic and evil ideology. It is a problem. My concern with Ayan's book, and I've read the book, I've reviewed the book, is that it's not actually going to keep us safe because the solution she's proposing, it's not going to get any traction. It's not going to go anywhere.
I'll give you a quick response.
Not gaining traction. I get emails, I get text messages, I get acknowledgements from Muslims on Twitter. You know the most common line that they write? We thank you for being out there because I can't be out there. I can't be out there because I'll be disowned by my family or I'll be threatened. So people who support me and who think like me and who know that there is a problem within and want to solve it, you can't hear them and you can't see them because they are threatened. And this gentleman is not speaking for them or on behalf of them.
I thank both of you for being here. Ayan, Haroon, you as well. Thank you. We appreciate it. When we return, how far should folks go to change radical Islam? Welcome back to our Kelly File special, Defying the Sword. On May 3rd, a group in Garland, Texas held a contest to draw pictures of Muhammad, an act considered an insult to the faith. Event organizers were trying to make a point about free speech in America and spent thousands on extra security to protect themselves. Both the FBI and local police were on alert. Sure enough, 2 young Muslim jihadis showed up with weapons and body armor, but were killed by police before they could get inside. Immediately, the accusations began. Organizers had deliberately provoked this attack, inviting their own attempted murder. We wanted to put that to our panel. Back now, author and lecturer Dr. Hirsi Ali, Dr. Zudi Jasser, head of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and author and physician Dr. Qanta Ahmed. Thank you both for being back with us, all of you. Dr. Ahmed, let me start with you. Your thoughts on the event down in Garland?
Democracy, as we know it, secular pluralistic democracy, is extremely robust and can withstand provocations like whatever was labeled in Texas, a cartoon contest. We can handle that provocation. But democracy is also a tool used by Islamists to actually augment Islamism. So saying that democracy is a solution shows a deep lack of understanding of political Islam. So the United States can handle cartoon contests, and as an observant Muslim, it doesn't affect me an iota. There's absolutely no Islamic crime there. It's a fictional crime prosecuted by Islamists. If an American wants to have these contests, they're free to do it. And it doesn't diminish my belief as a Muslim.
Zudi, what did you make of that? I mean, it was shocking, I thought, to see so many people rush to condemn the event organizers, who I admit are not the most sympathetic group. But put that to the side. Westboro Baptist Church is not a sympathetic group at all, and yet it was very clear, including to 8 out of 9 of the Supreme Court members, that they had the right to say what they were saying.
I think it's amazing that it belies an understanding of why America is the most successful liberal democracy in the world, is because of our First Amendment and because of the, they call this provocation, and yet our work, Qanta's, mine, and other reformers, are bigger provocations to Islamic states in Saudi Arabia and Iran. So they want to call this provocation because under the guise of things that do offend almost every Muslim, like criticizing the Prophet Muhammad, then they can prevent criticism that's necessary for reform and call us Islamophobes, etc.
What amazed me, Ayan, was how quick people were to rush to check our American values, forget what we stand for as Americans, which is free speech, even if it's offensive speech, and they labeled it hate speech, which is constitutional, which, you may not enjoy it, but it's constitutional, and instead try to appease, a faction of Islam that would have that speech shut down.
Adam Gopnik of the New Yorker made a distinction, and he was defending, in this case, a Pan-American Gala's award of courage to Charlie Hebdo survivors. And there were a number of very prominent authors from North America who withdrew. And in that defense, he lectured them on not understanding the distinction between acts of imagination and acts of violence. And the First Amendment is about protecting acts of imagination. And what happened in Garland, the cartoon contest, was an act of imagination. And the response to it by these two men who drove 1,000 miles was an act of violence. And all of us unanimously have to condemn them, those who are engaged in the act of violence, without saying a word about the people who are engaged in an act of imagination, even if we don't like what they're imagining, what they're gathering about.
Right. I mean, Qanta, in your view, it felt like when we saw so many pile on the organizers of the event, again, not the most sympathetic group, but it felt like we were losing a little bit of our ideals, because this is exactly what they want, is to shut us up, to say certain things are off limits and can't be discussed because a group finds them offensive, so we will impose our ideals on the majority, on the masses.
Muslims are told if someone dismisses, ridicules, pillories you for your belief, you must walk away and bid them peace. That's Islam. We did not see that happening in Texas. In the United States, we're given incredible freedoms as people of all faiths, or as people who are staunch atheists, which is a faith, to enjoy this. That is not the case in other places. The attempt to sully the privileges of the United States is a victory for anyone who is a patron or client or purveyor of Islamism, without question.
Zudi, how do you draw a distinction between Muslims in the United States who recognize the problem of radical Islam and would like to fight it and don't like what it is doing to the perception of Muslims at large to some extent, and those who, for example, our last guest, who came out and wanted to equate radical Islam with right-wing extremism, trying to draw some equation. That's a much bigger problem here in the United States, when it's like, I don't know. There are some examples of it. Not seeing beheadings, that often by right-wing extremists here in the United States. None come to mind.
Well, I think the distinction is, the bottom line is do individuals that claim to speak as Muslims recognize the deeper problem, or are they just dealing with violence and apologetics? If they say the problem is violence and just the means, that's absurd. The goal, what is the end game for these guys? If they want to do it peacefully or violently, the bottom line is the end game is blasphemy laws, apostasy laws, the Islamic State of some form. They are part of the problem, if not the major problem.
Thank you all so much for your thoughts and your participation tonight. We appreciate it greatly. And we'll be right back.